Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, brothers, sisters, viewers of IQRA TV, my friends, my colleagues, and more importantly, my guest with me here is the previous ex-Lord Mayor of Bradford, 40 years in politics and still going, discussing how democracy and how elections have a massive, massive impact in our lives. Again, Ghazanfar Sahab, we were talking about the elections going on. We started off with remembering and sending condolences to those that have innocently been murdered, and many, I said dozens, I'm sure, are maimed, injured, maybe lost of a limb or sight or anything else. You know, at least 32 that have been reported in Quetta. So please bear this in mind in terms of innocents murdered due to what? No fault of their own. So let's be grateful to the democracy we have here in the UK, in England, to the law and order, to the healthcare, to the educational systems, and how this democracy itself changes the society and the community that we live in today. So Ghazanfar Sahab, we were talking about how democracy is unfolding in front of our eyes right now, and how the elections are unfolding, and you more than anybody should know better in terms of being a man of politics for more than 40 years and still going strong. Don't know how you do it. What do you have to say about how your experiences are in both countries, and more importantly here, and how you've seen things develop?
I think democracy as a system is it's very important. Currently, there is no other system actually which has delivered for many in their own countries. If you take an example of Europe, before the democracy was established in Europe, Europe was in dark ages. To take an example of Bradford, take an example of Britain. 125 years ago, right? All those benefits you enjoy, the ordinary working class people enjoys in this country. There wasn't
No.
125 years ago.
No.
125 years ago, the woman wasn't allowed to vote in this country.
Yes.
Okay, so they struggle, right? And they sacrifice their lives actually to establish the system.
Yes.
Before 1945, 47, 48, in this country there was no free education. There was no free health service. There was no national insurance. There was no benefits. You know, so basically, what it has happened because of the democracy, right? And the ordinary people actually felt that they have destiny in their own hands. The political parties, the politicians responded to need of the people. Now, in Pakistan at this moment, it's early stages for the democracy. Democracy itself is not embedded in Pakistan. Ever since its creation, there has been ups and downs. You know, I don't want to go into the history of that, but the system itself, right? The Pakistan and the system it works on it's the 1938 Act, which the system is based.
I mean, everything is based on a British mandate and British sort of policies as well.
So what it isn't based there is that the difference between the rich and poor, right, and the lack of accountability, lack of the law enforcement. You know, no. So eventually, you know, in Pakistan, it's going through experiences of established the democracy. Now, what democracy does, it's two things. It's whoever's in power, it makes them feel like the one day they will be accountable. Right? Every 5 years, as I was elected politician, I knew that every 4 years I'll have to go back to the people who has elected me.
Indeed.
Okay. So if I haven't delivered, and if I haven't performed, if I haven't, you know, cared about their needs, and if I haven't, you know, if I haven't fought for their rights, then I knew that after 4 years, the people who are not going to vote for me, I'll be out of office. So that's what makes politicians accountable. Now, if you take an example in this country currently now, it makes politicians accountable that every 4 or 5 years, the politician comes around and people have the opportunity to judge their performance, and they judge political parties, and the political parties actually need the response to the demand and the needs of the people they represent. So this is what So Pakistan, it's going through that experience. So what I wish, because we live in Britain, because we still have a stake in Pakistan.
Many of us do.
Many of us still have the families, relatives, connections. You can't. It's completely disconnected.
No.
From
I mean,
Pakistan.
wherever you are, whoever you are, we're now living in times of living in a global village where everybody is everywhere. In terms of whether someone's from other side of the world, you'll always have connections somewhere else. The democracy to one side. I just want to pick you up on something you mentioned earlier on, which I said I will bring you back to that. There's such thing as controlled democracy and free democracy as such. I'd just like you to explain and elaborate in terms of what you mean by that. And again, with the corruption and the struggle for democracy, struggle for rights, struggle for freedom, equality, justice, insaf. Coincidentally, one of the parties is called Tahreek-e-Insaf, and this is something every human being wishes to have: is justice, insaf, security, stability, education. But one would say, not going into the Islamic side of things in terms of preaching and looking at Sharia, maqasidu Sharia, the purpose of Sharia is democracy, freedom, education, stability, security, tahaffuz of security of your wealth, health, your land. Unfortunately, I say this, in Asia, especially in many of the countries that currently we're talking about Pakistani elections and democracy itself, there is very little, hence the battle for justice and equality and democracy. So what do you mean by controlled democracy and free democracy, if I may?
Well, let me say to what with your remarks, actually, Islam is the first religion actually introduced in a sense, actually, that one could say that this was a democracy in a sense. Okay. Islam was the first one actually to introduce all social reforms and everything else.
Just going on to the voting part of it, property part of it, and everything else. Women were entitled to vote from day one.
So really, it started with the Azul Pak
Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Yes.
Right? Okay. So now, what I just said the controlled democracy. Even in Western countries, even where we live now in Britain, Britain is also there are a powerful mechanism, the powerful multinationals, a powerful people actually who
elite, control a lot of the economy and.
Now, I'm not going to mention the name of a newspaper.
Yes.
One newspaper used to determine who's going to get elected.
Indeed, yes.
In this country.
Yes.
Right? Where we have so-called a free democracy.
Yes.
Okay. Now, even in this country, there is.
So, would you call that a controlled democracy or a free democracy?
The multinationals and the entrusted powers, they are the one actually manipulate that how the democracy is going to function. Now, what by would you say they control, in a sense, actually, they control the media, they control the multinational, they control the means which for the democracy to function, right? So they actually, in a sense, right, give a direction whoever's going to get into power, get into elected. So what I'm just saying, that's what I've called is a controlled democracy. Here, you have political parties and then again you have multinational, you have media houses, you have print media, electronic medias, you have the bankers, you have the multinationals. So they are the one actually. Right, but here is slightly more democratic in a sense, where Pakistan, when I just saying is a controlled democracy, it's the powers who have been in power for the past 17 years. Okay. So they are the one actually control whether it's a democracy or whether it's non-democracy.
They're still controlling the...
They're still controlling it.
This could imply for many such countries, maybe even India, maybe even Bangladesh in certain areas, or maybe certain states of Africa where they have certain elected individuals for not just one term but long-term periods. And one of the biggest fallouts or one of the biggest problems we face or we will have in many of these areas is deprivation in terms of education, deprivation and in terms of health, education, health, and more importantly sustainability, livelihood, water, food. So poverty and the struggle and the poor getting poorer, which then leads to law and order issues, which then leads to crime, justice, all having a burden in the state. What would you advise our youthful candidates here again in Bradford and other around the country in terms of going forward? Because there are reports, whether they're from the EU or whether they're from the government itself, in terms of deprivation in many of these areas where a lot of the Asians do live in, and the lack of engagement in the three areas which you've sort of called them out in terms of policing, politics and press. So media, be it social media or anything else. And our lack of engagement in these areas, isn't it our own responsibility in terms of lack of engagement?
I think there is an element of that actually. There is serious issues which in past 20 years actually have developed in Britain. There are certain sections, particularly within inner city areas. It's mainly the Asian working class people who are on the receiving end. Obviously, the poor education, poor health facilities, poor education, poor lack of opportunities. So there is underclass being sort of developed in a sense. Well, I would say develop is the wrong word actually. There is a underclass which is being created. Now the system here was based on that the 30% of people would go into manual jobs, manual works. 30% of people would go into sort of semi-professional jobs, and 30% of people would go into higher education.
Yes.
That's how this system was functioning in previously. Right. So if you think about it, this is how.
But that's when there were the economies and the industries were thriving.
That's where I'm coming back to it. Now, ever since the decline of the manufacturing industry in Britain, okay, ever since the decline of the working class as a class itself, okay. Now, because there's a new definition of working class people, those people working in retails, they. Okay, but that is now the new working class. Working in the retail sectors. That is call centers and various others. So the particular problem is because for quite a number of years now, austerity is beginning to hit Britain badly, and particularly those communities actually who are weak within the community itself. Those communities are most deprived. Those are the ones actually would. Have health issues. Those who will have bad housing conditions. Those will have so you name it. Now, unless you tackle those issues now, what they're going to happen is going to get worse. So they will become ghettos, just like in United States. There are certain parts of United States actually they become ghettos.
Yeah, they are.
So this is what's beginning to happen in most of the inner city areas, whether it's in whichever city you go into, you know, there is a class actually being developed actually, and there are areas being developed actually, which is more or less going towards becoming ghettos. You know, and also there's a divide between the communities. That's the bigger issue is going to face up to it. You know, it's becoming more or less becoming them and us, us and them. Okay, so inner city areas is a predominantly Asian community now, and outer skirt is predominant indigenous population.
I'm going to hold them thoughts for the time being. We are going for a short break, and we will discuss some of these issues in terms of what's dividing us and what's uniting us, and what do we need to do more in terms of politics, policing, and especially the press, whether it's the print media or whether it's the social media, the press importantly. So let's look at these 3 P's. Stay with us. Real Talk live from Bradford. See you shortly after the break.